There was a guy who was selling something on Instagram. So it was an ad. It was a sponsored post. And the guy is acting like he's talking to someone, but it never cuts to the other person. So whatever the guy's pitching, name your poison, right? He's pitching coaching, or he'll make Instagram ads for you, or whatever the case may be. Teach you how to sell, teach you how to go to TJ Maxx, right? Scan tags and see what they sell on Amazon. It never cut to the other person. And so just because we've talked about this before, just because I'm a sort of a schadenfreuder, I go into the comments section just to see how lawless it gets. Mm-hmm. And it was awful. They were just destroying this poor chap. Like
they're upset that he didn't have someone else to talk to?
Well, it was more like, dude, you're a creep.
Wow.
You're a creepazoid. Like, why are you trying to act like you have a podcast when you're not cutting to anyone? And that was like the first time that I saw someone purporting to be a podcast host, but not having a guest. And I think, Lev and I were just talking just moments ago, and it's like, we do have a podcast, but how funny would it be to film like a April Fool's like episode?
Yeah, let's not alienate all the people out there that had those imaginary friends in elementary school.
Yeah. I probably at one point told you I had a girlfriend in Canada whose dad had a helicopter or something.
Listen, my close friend from New York, Gene, when we were living in Ukraine, he convinced me that there was a secret guy named Kapsushko that was chasing us in third grade. And we would hide from him and played all these crazy war games. And there was this imaginary murderer that was chasing us all of third grade.
Only in the USSR would you play war games as a child.
It was wild.
It's so great.
Amazing.
Yeah. You have an interesting childhood. We've never really talked about that like on camera. People see you and think Latin. For sure, when I see your dad, that's the first thing.
Or some of the other comments said, white boy with daddy money or something like that.
Oh, yeah. We saw that comment this morning.
Oh, so hilarious.
So maybe just take a quick moment and let's dig in. You and I met each other. You were 10?
Yeah. Maybe like 11.
You were 11? Okay. I was 10.
Like 11 and 10.
Yeah. And this is 1980.
This would have been 89 already, right?
89.
Yeah.
So when did the wall fall?
I want to say in 90.
Okay.
This was pre-wall. So we made it here from Ukraine, or was then the Soviet Union, before the wall fell.
From Odessa,
Ukraine, and still at a time when you couldn't take anything with you.
Because it was communist. And so you just left with a little bit of a few trinkets that you'd converted, your little cash that your family had saved up. Yeah.
You converted into some trinkets that you knew that Western Europeans would want to buy from you.
Yeah.
As you went through these refugee camps on the way to whatever Western country you were going to get to.
What are the trinkets, like matryoshkas or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Matryoshkas. I can't even remember them being matryoshkas, which are these nesting dolls. For anyone who doesn't know what matryoshka is, Russian nesting dolls. But they were these jewelry boxes that were prized possessions, I guess, by Western Europeans. They were handmade and lacquered.
Lacquer's very big in Russia, but also, I don't know if you remember this, years and years ago, we went to a buddy's house in Turtle Rock in Irvine. Remember John Kim was like his friends.
Okay.
And they were from Korea, and they had all this lacquered stuff.
Really?
Yeah. So I think in the 70s, this was like a big deal.
It's a big thing.
Yeah. It was.
But I think this is kind of along the same lines as like Fabergé eggs, right? This is handwork by artists. They draw these things with, I imagine, with paints on wood, and then it gets lacquered over.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was very valuable.
Do you have any idea? Was it difficult to leave? Because I I've really never asked you this question, but like, if you live in Cuba, there's one way to get off the island. It's swim.
Yeah.
Right. And if you are living in North Korea, which is another communist country, there's one way to get out, which is through China. But that's very dangerous and oftentimes doesn't end well. And oftentimes you'll get repatriated by the Chinese government, right? Like they'll force you to go back. Was it easy to leave? Do you have any idea?
I don't think so. I mean, again, we were little kids, but from what I understand, Gorbachev made it fairly simple for various people who felt persecuted within the Soviet Union to get the heck out of there.
Interesting.
And Gorbachev really made this possible.
Okay. But probably before that, it was difficult.
Yeah, there was some period of time where it was difficult, but it was easier in the late 70s and then easier again in the late 80s.
Interesting. Okay.
Those were two waves of immigration out of the Soviet Union.
So your parents decide to leave, and I don't want to dwell on this topic too much, but I think just based off that comment this morning with the white boy daddy's money comment, it's important to just contextualize things. But so they decide to leave for greener pastures. And I know you had some family already here, but was it wasn't just, hey, let's go to America, right? It was, let's leave the USSR, right? And then,
in fact, it's not just, hey, let's go to America. It's America doesn't want you. You have to convince America to want you.
And how did you know America didn't want you as a refugee?
Because when you're initially leaving, you are going to Israel. So as Jewish people who are leaving the Soviet Union, your only option to tell the Soviet Union where you're going is to say you're going to Israel.
Okay, so you guys did
because you did not have no direct relatives in America. They could be cousins, but it's not your mother, father, sister, brother.
But did you guys first go to an American embassy, like in Odessa, and say, like, was there an embassy?
So definitely not.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no embassy. Right. There were no relations at that time.
That's true, right?
So you couldn't. So you ended up as a refugee going to these refugee camps, first in Austria in Vienna, and second in Italy, where the one we ended up with was called, it was a city called Ladispoli on the Mediterranean.
Ladispoli, yeah.
Which actually is a very beautiful place.
You've visited since?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a beautiful place.
You take your family there and you're like, son, daughter, this is where I was a refugee.
Yeah, it was crazy.
But you weren't living in encampments, right?
No. A refugee camp just meant that an organization in America called HIAS, H-I-A-S, provided the refugees with some small amounts of money to be able to afford to rent a small apartment for like a family of 8 people,
right?
While they figured out where they would ultimately end up.
So you end up in Ladispoli, right? In Italy.
First in Vienna, and then that was kind of a short stay, maybe for like 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And then from there, the train to Italy, and we end up in Ladispoli. That's where we spent 2 to 3 months.
Listen, there are a lot of Jews that started out in Austria and
didn't make it out.
Didn't make it out. So big win there, getting to Italy. And it's funny, right, that post World War II, these countries that you're referring to that took in refugees, I wonder if it was part of the Marshall Plan. Like you went to Austria first, then you went to Italy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know the actual reason why we had to go to Austria before Italy, but I remember the train from Moscow where we ended up we left Ukraine with, a few suitcases of stuff and that's it.
Yeah.
Right. And imagine like my parents must have been 37 and 30 or 38 and 30. Just can't even imagine. Imagine what that's like. We're quite a bit older than that now. I can't even imagine what they were feeling like.
37-year-old guys still going to clubs in Las Vegas.
Yeah. And these guys were going on a train car, leaving the only country they ever knew, getting their passports confiscated because you're now enemy of the state, getting on a train car, and the kids are asking their parents, right? We were asking our parents, why are there men with guns?
Yeah.
And the men with guns were there to protect you because very bad things could happen.
Like what?
If people knew that this is a train car full of people escaping the Soviet Union, it might hurt them.
Yeah.
Right. It might do bad things.
Yeah.
So there were actually people with submachine guns.
And they're there to protect you.
Yeah.
That's wild.
So you end up in Austria and Italy, and then, the men take these things that they converted their cash into.
Yeah.
And they try to sell them on the black market.
Is that what your dad was doing during the day?
We were all hanging out at home.
Yeah.
And the dads, right? These were men mostly in their 30s.
With gnarly mustaches, I would imagine.
with gnarly mustaches and crazy clothes. Yeah. And they were going to this place and you're like, oh, a black market. Is that a website? No, it's a place.
Yeah.
So in Italy, the black market is a place. And it's a place where people bring foreign goods that you can't get access to, and they exchange it for various types of currency.
Yeah.
So you could get US dollars, you can get lira, you can get all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And so they sold these jewelry boxes and camera equipment. So apparently Europeans valued certain kinds of Russian cameras or Soviet cameras at that time.
Right.
So super interesting, right? I mean, imagine the anxiety of the 35 to 40-year-old adults having to go to some place where they don't speak the language and they have to go to a black market. I don't know for a fact, but I'm guessing what they were doing was illegal, right? It probably was not sanctioned by the state.
Right.
That's why it's called a black market.
Right.
Right. You could probably be arrested by the police or something for being there.
Yeah.
And so they were able to convert these cameras and boxes into something like $1,500 or $1,600 in cash.
Interesting.
And that's it. And that's what you come to America with.
And so you wait. So is your dad's going to these black markets during the day, and is mom going to an embassy and saying like, what's the status? Like she's like waiting in line?
So mom just hangs out. The kids get to go to school. So Hyas had set up some schools for the refugee children.
Yeah.
Which was nice.
Were they taught in English?
Yes, but they also had some people that spoke Russian or Ukrainian, if that's what you're more comfortable with. But generally, they were taught in English.
Yeah.
Most everyone was trying to go to an English-speaking country.
Okay.
Australia, Canada, U.S.
Okay.
And then some people were also going to Israel.
Yeah.
But the ultimate goal was during this time to take your whole family. I think for us that was 8 or 9 people.
Yeah.
Go to Rome and go to the American embassy or consulate.
Right.
Line them up and say, we would like to go to America. We do not want to go to Israel. So take us.
Yeah.
And some gentleman in the U.S. embassy got to say, like Gladiator, yay or nay.
And was that guy, I'm trying to kind of imagine what this looks like, but like it's a dark room and like cash is exchanged hands.
No, not at all.
No.
I don't think any cash gets exchanged.
No.
I think he just lines you up and asks logical questions. Like, what does this family do for a living?
Yeah.
What's your level of education? You know?
And at that point, your parents both had college degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. They'd already sort of started their professional lives.
Right. Both engineers, right?
Yeah. And, you know, my dad's family, his parents were with us and they're both physicians. So I think that helps. Yeah. And so they just kind of look you up and down and try to figure out, you know, are these people we want in America or not?
It's like, it's not just, are they spies? It's like, can they actually contribute to the economy?
I think they're a lot more worried about someone contributing to this country.
And not just leeching off of it.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Because it's wild that you left. The timing of it is absolutely brilliant because for a lot of people who don't know, you had a government allocated apartment, right, in Odessa.
Yeah. Nobody owned real estate.
Yeah. Sorry, Ryan Pineda. Nobody was running real estate.
You were allocated a horrible, horrible apartment to live in.
Yeah, but you didn't know it was horrible. You were a kid. What did you know?
I think we knew.
You knew. You
Yeah.
had an idea.
Yeah. Some people had nicer ones.
Yeah.
But ours, we knew was horrible.
But I guess the point I'm making is that a year later, the wall falls, Gorbachev's arrested, and all of a sudden, people get to take ownership of their apartment.
Yeah.
Right. Which is so wild because that's the component of capitalism that probably was most missing from Russia, which is the ownership of private property, right?
Yeah, and we missed out on that whole thing, so I have no clue how that worked. I imagine it was a huge mess at first.
Because I could deal without freedom of speech.
Can you?
I think I could. Yeah, I think I could. But I think what would really be challenging would be like the lack of ownership of private property. Because I think, you know,
I feel like you'd be in prison very quickly.
Probably. Just because of the free speech issue. Okay, yeah, you're probably right. Yeah. But I think the timing of your departure from Odessa, leaving the USSR, the former USSR, if you had just timed it a year, if you guys would have just waited one more year, or not even maybe a full year. I don't remember what year
we would have owned
month.
like an apartment, maybe worth 25 to 50,000 US dollars.
I mean, it sounds like a joke, right?
Yeah.
Like not a lot of money, but I think that's a game changer.
Yeah, for sure, right?
Yeah.
The people who came after the wall fell,
Yeah.
they didn't come here as impoverished refugees.
Right.
They were in a better financial situation.
Yeah, it's wild.
And it was just a difference of a couple of years.
Because at that time, and again, I only have exposure to really like Southern California, but in 1990, you could buy a really nice 4-bedroom house in Southern California for probably 150 grand.
Yeah, right around there. Yeah.
So, leaving with $25,000 to $50,000, one heck of a down payment.
Yeah, it's not bad.
No, it's not bad. So I think
they could also own businesses, right? They could do a bunch of different things.
that's true.
Right? So
yeah.
they had a lot more options.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is an interesting, right? This story, it sounds, everyone says, oh, it's such an interesting story. But it's not a unique story, right? You got Gary Vaynerchuk, right? All the way to Dan Fleischman, right? There are a lot of people online who've gone through the same path and same process.
Yeah. When we talk about that and how the immigrant story is the trauma, and then you add drive, and somehow that odd equation equals success. But you have to have both components. You have to have the drive, but you also have to have that childhood trauma. Is it trauma? I'm not like trying to like bullshit with you, but like, is there trauma? Do you remember coming to America and going like, gosh, I don't really speak English that well. I don't really know what these kids are saying. I'm probably wearing weird clothes. Like, for example, remember when we were friends, I'd come over to your house, I'd sleep over to your house. You'd give me a blanket, but it was a towel. That was kind of odd.
It was a blanket. It's very rude that you call it a towel.
I would come home and tell my parents like they gave me towels to sleep with.
Yeah.
It's
I don't know. I think trauma is a heavy word. But is it a challenge, right? Is it difficulty? Are these obstacles? I mean, huge ones, right? And everybody deals with it differently.
How did you deal with it? Because I don't even remember you having an accent.
Again, for some people, change is really traumatic.
Yeah.
Right. Some people deal with change much worse than others. And we see that, right? In adults.
Yeah.
Right. As we've grown up, we've seen sometimes that's the difference between failure and success, or different levels of success.
Yeah.
Is the way that a human being deals with change.
Yeah.
Pretty simple, right? The folks that adjust and deal with change the best tend to do 2, 3, 4x better.
Yeah. It's the agility, right? To be able to become nimble and adapt.
Yeah.
Also, right, we talk about this. We know some people that are on Instagram and they're posting some type of content, right? And they're not getting the response that they need to stay motivated, but they also refuse to look in the mirror at the type of stuff they're posting.
Right.
Right. That's the agility part. That's the being able to like understand who you are when you look in the mirror, right? You're seeing maybe the reflection of somebody who's successful. But I think in truth, a third party looking back at that reflection sees some limitations, right? And that's the challenging part, is to stay motivated in the face of things not going well. But like you said, right, it's the people that can be introspective, right, and adapt. That's the difference in the levels of success.
Yeah. So, it's such a unique circumstance you're thrown into, right? A new culture, new language, and you're put in a socioeconomic position where you're at the bottom of the bottom rung of the ladder. Right?
Yeah.
You have nothing.
Yeah.
Right? You're donated furniture into an apartment that's very difficult to pay for from the very beginning.
Right.
And your parents are looking for work that is far below, right, their level of education.
Right.
And you have to figure out, do you have enough grit to deal with these types of issues as a 11-year-old?
Do you ever ask your parents how difficult it was, that transition?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have to ask them. I think it's painted on their faces, right? Yeah. It's the wrinkles and the scars and everything else. Yeah. It's all there to this day. And listen, God bless the people who deal with it in the best way possible. I think on average, as a human being, that's a lot to ask
Yeah.
to deal with that in the middle of your life. And I think, everyone should be very thankful to their parents if they have had to go through things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. We together, Dean and I, own a company, both in the US and in Mexico. And we meet so many people that have these immigrant tales.
Yeah.
And for the most part, the ones that we hear in Mexico, those immigrant tales didn't end so well. Right? Because a lot of them were dreamers, right? They were brought over illegally into America by their parents, and their parents had to grind and probably weren't at home to kind of govern the children. And the children kind of grew up on the street and in a challenged socioeconomic area, and very easily fell into the trap of gangs and drugs and violence and skipping school and stuff like that.
These are real stories.
Yeah.
Like, we're not just making things up and drawing parallels.
No.
We had an employee who had a head full of tattoos.
Yeah, George.
And
R.I.P.
we asked him, where do these tattoos come from? Is there, are these symbols things that you like? How old were you when you got them? And we learned that these are tattoos that began for someone at the age of 11, 12, 13 years old, and were encouraged by their own family members who were gang members.
Yeah.
So it's, how much does a child really, he didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
There's no choice
You can't
there.
escape that.
Right.
And so, you contrast those stories, and unfortunately, right, a lot of good people, right, get caught up in that life. And I think you contrast that story with yours or some of the people that we know. And it's wild because these immigrant stories, they all start off with the same pretext, which is, we are escaping a country for a better life. Let's see what we can do. And,
it's a very cool, it's a cool process.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But it is trauma, right? It is traumatic making that transition. And it's one of those things where it's like, you meet Holocaust survivors and you want to interview them. You want to get their story.
Mm-hmm.
You want to understand everything. They don't necessarily want to share.
No.
And so with your folks, as an example,
they don't want to share.
They don't want to share. Yeah. But I think your story is amazing. Your story in and of itself as an 11-year-old coming to America, because I think, again, the contrast, right? You have two kids, as American as apple pie, white boy, daddy money type kids. And
that might be a more accurate statement.
Yeah, absolutely. And they don't have the trauma. They may have the drive. But they lack the trauma. And
if they say they have the trauma, got to call them out.
Yeah. Or do you? Because everyone has, somebody once said that to me. They're like, the guy who works the fries at McDonald's has the same amount of stress as a business owner, right?
In his mind.
Yep. And so who knows, maybe it's the trauma of being short. Maybe it's the trauma of being not as athletic.
Sure.
Not having the same aptitude, but grinding amongst your peers. Everybody's got trauma.
Yeah, but I don't think you'd trade this process of starting with nothing and getting somewhere for the world. Why would you want to trade something like that? It's such an amazing experience.
Listen, congratulations, you made it. You're asking me, would I want to trade my childhood situation to go back and have to relive what you lived through? That's a no from me, dog.
Interesting.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. That sounds way difficult.
Yeah.
Right? People talk about waiting in line for bread or paying off someone who works at a construction site to get some bricks so that you can do,
yeah.
That is,
it's all real.
Yeah, that is real.
Yeah.
That is not
it's the problem with communism.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And the best way that I can describe communism, I think this is probably a good thing for the audience to hear, is if you think about a construction company, everyone understands what a construction company does. They build things, buildings.
Right.
So the government, right, owns everything. But yet there are still construction companies where people work. And the government says, we'd like to build a school. And the construction company says, wonderful, let's build a school.
Right.
And the government asks the construction company, how many bricks do we need to build a school? And the construction company thinks about it for a little bit.
This is the
and
estimator.
says, yeah, I think we need 100,000 bricks to build this school.
Mm.
And the government says, okay, are you sure? He goes, no.
Did I say 100?
I didn't say 100. Make it 150,000 bricks to build the school.
Right.
And so the government allocates 150,000 bricks to the school. The construction company builds the schools with 100,000 bricks.
Right.
Where did the other 50,000 bricks go? They go into the black market, right?
Yeah.
And on that black market, the bricks are sold at market value. And what do you see in the construction company? Well, the owner, right? There's no such thing. But the man in charge of the construction company, what does he do? Well, he has a driver. The driver drives him in a car. Most people don't have cars.
Right.
His apartment, everyone has the same apartment. No, his apartment's a little nicer. He has an extra room. And he might have a record player, right? Or a tape player, something fancy, something nobody else has.
Yeah.
And so you wonder, where does this stuff come from? These are people fighting the chains of communism.
Yeah.
Right. And just yearning for a more capitalistic system.
Engendering their own version of capitalism, right?
Right. Wanting their labor to be valued, wanting themselves to be valued.
Right.
Right. Humans were never meant to be equal. Right?
Did everyone in the USSR at that time kind of make the same wage? Like if you're an environmental engineer or you're a nuclear engineer or like how did that work?
Yeah, like should you get paid the same as a garbage man?
I think so.
There's nothing wrong with being a garbage man.
No, but I think you did, right?
But yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Everybody gets the same 100 ruble salary.
I remember you telling me they would print the cost of a spoon on the back. And I thought that
amazing.
was so wild.
Amazing.
Like this price of a spoon never changed. The price of a spoon was like, because we talk about this too as adults, right? Your wife will send you on a mission to the grocery store, which you find relaxing because you get to be by yourself.
Wonderful.
And you're like, you walk into the produce section. I love this story. You should tell it, right? Because it has to do with not understanding what an item should cost. Back in the USSR, you knew that a spoon costs a certain amount of money.
It's always the same price.
Right. But then you walk into a Ralph's, right? And they're like, on sale, oranges, grapes, $3.99 a pound. You're like, seems fair.
Yeah, I don't know how much things are supposed to cost. So I bring them home and then she tells me that bananas, that's an egregious price to pay for bananas.
How could you do that? How irresponsible.
I didn't know bananas are supposed to cost 79 cents. I thought $4 was fine.
So it's funny. You're the capitalist. She's the communist going, the price of a banana is X and it's pegged. It doesn't move. You should always buy bananas at this strike price.
Yeah. And I ask her why. They go, but they're not that price today. She's like, well, wait until they're in season.
Can't eat a banana.
That sounds very communist.
Sounds
only in the Soviet Union could you only eat fruit when they were in season.
Shout out to Lev, by the way, also.
Oh, the Lev.
Yeah. I'm just surrounded by...
Same story.
Literally.
But when we got to Vienna, that was our first refugee stop along the path to America. We saw enormous stalls filled with bananas. Never seen anything like that before.
Yeah.
Everyone was amazed. We ate bananas for like 3 days.
Because you had never had one?
No, yeah. It was like this amazing delicacy, right?
My wife is from Korea, as you well know. Same thing. In Korea, they didn't have tropical fruit like pineapples.
Surprising.
Why?
Because they're next to all of these tropical islands.
Oh, in the South, like Thailand and that kind of stuff. Yeah, they didn't have that stuff. But more than them not having tropical fruit, right, which obviously they do today. But it was like at that time, you would have to go to a black market near an army base. And there you could get Spam and like American cheese, like the little individually wrapped.
Kraft singles.
Kraft singles,
The most
yeah.
disgusting cheese ever.
But they thought it was heaven.
Oh,
They thought it was heaven. So they could get, again, black market. They'd
Yeah.
have to go there and sell stuff, or they'd have to go there and use, they'd have to use their money to buy goods from these service people who could get it from the exchange. But boy, and that set it off. Because now if you eat like any type of Korean food, cheese is a huge part, right, of their diet. It's like all the rage. And then Spam is put into anything and everything.
I'm a big kimchi person.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's a superfood.
It's a very Russian food too.
It
Russians
totally is.
love the kimchi.
Absolutely.
Russians, Ukrainians, I'm calling them all the same thing, but
Yeah.
I don't want
But
people to get political
It's
about it.
climate wise, right? It's like, although not necessarily in Odessa because that's on the Black Sea, but like when you have these harsh winters, you have to put this stuff away so that you have food.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Same in Korea.
So yeah, it's an interesting journey, and here we are.
Yeah. What a wild story.
Right. And we met right at the beginning of that journey when we first got to America. And I think you were my first friend.